For many of us, we associate the word rest with sleep, whether it's sleeping at night, maybe taking a nap, maybe even getting something like a massage. And what I want to do in this video is to actually expand our concept of rest. So what I'm going to do is talk about passive rest and active rest and how those can completely transform our overall health and well-being. Now, before we dive in, if you are brand new to my channel, hello and welcome. My name is Jermaine. This channel, Live Well Zone, is all to help women live well so that they can be well in their bodies. So now let's talk about passive and active rest. So from my perspective, passive rest is basically anything that doesn't require voluntary action on your part. It's something that doesn't require your conscious mind to be present. So to me, that is sleep, right? When you're sleeping, there is really no action required of you. You don't have to be present for it to actually happen. So that to me is passive rest. Now, active rest is going to require you to take some voluntary action. It requires you to be awake and aware of what's going on. And this is where you start to find different options. So one example of active rest could be you're sitting in your backyard, you are listening to birds singing, for example. That requires very little effort. Your brain is not having to do a whole lot of processing. So for the most part, even though you're awake, it's a more restful state of being. So that's one example. Another example could be taking a lazy walk, an emphasis on lazy, because we're not talking about taking a walk where you are focused on getting some very strong cardiovascular benefits. You're just taking the walk, you're feeling into your body, you're taking in the scenery and everything. That again doesn't require a ton of work from you. So even though you're awake, it is for the most part much more restful. So that's an example. Now there's another level of where we can start thinking about active rest. So another option could be you start getting into things like meditation, right? And meditation comes in lots of different forms. But meditation, what's interesting about meditation is that it can take your brain waves into lots of different states, and you can meditate into brainwave states that are similar to brainwave states that you would be in when you are sleeping. And you can even go into brainwave states that would be considered super conscious, for example. So meditation, it can be super restful when you're practiced and you get the right guidance. But again, I put it in the category of active because it does require you to take the initiative, and because you're not sleeping, you're still awake and aware, but you're just going through a very it's an experience that is not necessarily tied to our 3D world. So that's another example. Mindfulness practices can be done eyes open, eyes closed, right? You could do a mindful walk, you could be gardening, and that can be considered also a mindful thing if you are fully present and engaged and kind of very embodied in it. There are also somatic practices, and there's lots of different things when we get into somatic practices. One that I personally enjoy, which is both somatic and also would be considered meditation, is yoga nidras, right? So yoga nidra has become very popular over the years. It was, I think, kind of coined the term non-sleep deep rest by Andrew Huberman. And it is a meditative practice. So its primary purpose is really still for that spiritual growth to get us into higher states. But what's interesting about yoga nidra is that it takes your body, takes your brain through similar brainwave states as if you were sleeping. So that's another one, and you're lying down. So it does have more of a restful feel to it, because meditating when you're sitting up does take some effort just to hold your body up. And once you're lying down and you're not doing anything, that is already physically more relaxing, releases more tension from your body. So those are just some examples of what I would consider active rest. So we've got passive rest and we've got active rest. In addition to things, to what maybe we can see as like mental rest, we can also think about nutritional rest, right? So that's still active because that is still voluntary action on your part. But from a nutritional perspective, you can take rest, get a rest in different ways. So simple example is, let's say you're someone who typically you're eating out, you buy a lot of prepackaged foods. If you were to decide that you now want to start cooking more of your meals at home, or even all of your meals, you're not taking a rest from all of those processed, pre-made foods, right? So you're now reducing your exposure to things like additives and preservatives and synthetic, dyes and all kinds of things that can potentially disrupt your health. And then we also can take this another step further and start thinking about, let's say, detoxes and cleanses. And even here again, there's different forms, right? Are you going to do maybe a detox that requires eating a certain amount of food, or maybe a very limited set of foods? Are you going to do maybe more of a cleanse that's leaning more towards juicing? There's a range here, but the purpose here is still to give the body a break, right? Because the thing with rest is, at the end of the day, whether we're talking about sleep, whether we're talking about a detox, the benefit is that rest is when the body gets to recalibrate. Now, certainly different types of recalibration happen based on whether we're awake or asleep. And at the end of the day, sleep is always going to be, I would say, that's where the most repair work happens in our system. But nonetheless, we benefit from still making sure that while we're awake, that we're giving our body different forms of rest, and we're not just working it, because if we do that, then we run our system down. Now, that was a little bit of a tangent. So going back to the nutritional rest, another option is fasting, right? So intermittent fasting, whether you're choosing to fast for 12 hours, 16 hours, that is another way of just giving your body rest, giving your digestive system, for sure, some rest. You could decide to do a longer fast, right? Whether it's a 3-day, whether you want to do a week. Some people do month-long fast for lots of different reasons, whether it's for health reasons, for spiritual reasons, right? Religions have different periods where fasting is part of, I would say, part of their system, right? So there's lots of different ways in which you can also give your body rest from a nutritional perspective, and you're going to get benefits from them, because not only do you maybe when you do those nutritional, let's say, rests, you're giving your body a break from things that might be wearing it down, and you're giving it time to reset, to recalibrate. Just like with sleep or just like with meditation, it's just another opportunity from a nutritional perspective to unplug, right? So we will unplug our electronic devices and then we plug them back in, and the idea is that it will work better when it gets unplugged. And same thing with us, and we have lots of different ways to do that resetting. So that's the nutritional part. Now there's also exercise, right? Our day-to-day movement. So a simple way of thinking about this, I think the most obvious would be, if you're somebody who typically is working out all the time and you're doing a lot of high intensity activities, then your most obvious form of rest is to just either take a full break or to go ahead and mix in some lighter forms of exercise into your routine. There's also restorative forms of movement. So here we start getting into maybe different types of yoga. So maybe yin yoga, for example, would be one form. We can also think about qigong. We could think about tai chi. These are forms of movement that even though they require us to move the body, we're doing it with more presence, and they really restore energy. They allow the body to bring energy back into a system versus constantly expending and giving out energy. So there's also restorative movement, and those are also still forms of active rest. So that's the basic premise, and that's kind of the overview that I wanted to give with you, so that you can start thinking about different buckets and different ways in which you can rest your system, so that you can start bringing more balance into your day-to-day life. And then before I move on to the final part of this video, just want to quickly also share that there's also obviously taking a rest from social media, from entertainment, from just overstimulation when it comes to modern life and electronics. certainly taking a rest from people, and that can, you can take that in whatever direction you want, but sometimes we don't have a choice but to be around people that may not be the most, they may require us to give out more of our energy than we are able to get back, right? So also taking a rest when it comes to people is necessary and essential for our health. So now, with all of that basic premise, what I want to do with the rest of the video is to just give you some quick tips and quick things to think about in terms of how you can really start incorporating these concepts of active and passive rest into your life. So the number one thing is you have to take some time to do a self-assessment, to see where things are in your life and where you could benefit from actually making some kind of change. So do you need more rest when it comes to just maybe more the mental and emotional side? So would you benefit more from things like meditation or mindfulness? Do you need more rest when it comes to the food that you're exposing your body to, right? Or do you need rest when it comes to your consumption of media or people? All of those things, you do have to take the time to first do that self-assessment, because we all go through different phases, and what may be most beneficial for you, let's say, what was most beneficial for you 5 years ago may not be the most beneficial for you now. So it's a process of always re-evaluating when you feel like there's something missing. So, and your clues as to, do you even need this would be obviously if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling very frazzled, if you've got physical symptoms of any kind going on in your body. Those are all clues that your body needs some way to reset, some way to recalibrate. So those are, so look at all the symptoms, whether they are emotional or physical, it doesn't really matter. They are all pointing to the same underlying need and desire as far as what your system needs. So along with that, with doing a self-assessment, you also want to think about this, ironically, as I talked about in the previous section about taking a break from social media and from overstimulation. Sometimes it's really hard to do a proper self-assessment if we are not able to take a step back from all the things that are sort of calling at us and taking our energy. So this is where, to do a self-assessment, you might actually have to hit the pause button, right? And that could mean maybe it's literally, depending on how much time and how much energy you give to the outer world, you might need to take a few hours, you might need to take half a day, you might need to take a weekend and just say, I'm gonna hit pause. I am not going to, maybe I'm not going to mingle with people for a while. Maybe I'm not gonna hop onto Instagram or whatever for a while, because I need to just quiet things down so that I can hear what my system needs, because the body's always talking to us, but it doesn't speak nearly as loudly as all the distractions. I would say, well, it speaks loudly when it comes to physical symptoms, but it's not using words. And so because it's not using words, it can be easy for us to kind of just ignore it and say, well, I'll deal with this later. So give yourself some time, like be intentional and say, I'm going to take this weekend, for example, to just have some downtime and to see what comes up. And then from there, you can start taking the appropriate steps. So those are really the two things. Is you must do a self-assessment, because all rest is beneficial, but which one you specifically need, only you can identify that. And yes, at the same time, it does mean that whether, after you've watched my video or maybe you go watch a bunch of other videos, that you still need to find some quiet time for yourself to tune in and figure out what it is that you actually need. Now, I will just add a quick note that from personal experience, like if going back to things like meditation, because I always think that it's helpful to have some sort of practice that really helps us turn inwards. And I won't say I've done them all, but I've done a lot. And so one I will say that I think can be really helpful is yoga nidra, because as I mentioned earlier in the video, it's a practice that really gets you into also feeling your body. And I have found it to just be, it's just it's so soothing. It feels like you're giving, it's like giving yourself a hug all the time. Like every time you do it, you just come out of it feeling so refreshed. You're laying down, it's effortless, and you can really go into some very deep states with it, but it's a nice thing to explore. So I would just, based on personal experience, I would highly recommend Yoga Nidra, especially if you're new to meditation or you've tried meditation, you're like, I can't do this. You might find this one to be much more interesting than some of the other forms of meditation where you're maybe following your breath or you're tuning into the space around you. Like some of those can be a little bit difficult. Yoga Nidra still keeps you connected to you, and yet at the same time, it takes you on a nice little journey. So I'm going to share some links below. There are 2 channels that I always go to for Yoga Nidra sessions. So one of them is Ali Boothroyd and the other one is Kristen Rose. I believe both ladies are actually connected. In real life, they do retreats together. They're both in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. So they have their own, I would say they have similar styles, but as teachers, they're still different, even though you can tell that they're coming most likely from the same background, the same training. So I'm going to link to their channel below so that you can go check out their videos. And if you try them out, I'd love to hear it. I am not affiliated with either of these women. I just love their work, and I am just so grateful that they put out these Yoga Nidra sessions on YouTube for all of us. On that note, thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. Please share with anybody who would benefit from this information. And I would love to hear your thoughts about these concepts of active and passive rest. Which ones do you feel that you are already incorporating? Do you think there are any gaps in your life? Are there some that you kind of instinctively feel like you need to do more of or focus on for now? Share your thoughts in the comments. Always love hearing from you guys, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.